Hello and welcome to On Point. I'm Ashton Smith. We're a full year away from electing our next president, but already there has been much talk about some of the candidates who are running. Candidates like Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, Ben Carson, and of course, Donald Trump.
We want to give people freedom? We're not going to have our own freedom pretty soon if we keep doing this.
What seems to make these people stand out is that each one is trying to claim that he or she is an outsider. The question is, what makes someone an outsider? In the first Democratic debate, moderators actually asked candidates to explain their outsider status. And on the GOP side, the frontrunners are two men who have never even held elected office. On Point's Nick Popham has more on the brand that is the outsiders.
Thank you, Ashton. Joining me today is a U.S. history professor from LA Valley College, Professor Michael Powelson. Next, we have a political science professor from Pierce College, Denise Robb. And finally, we have a CSUN political science professor, Tyler Hughes. Thank you all for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
So the first question that I have is, why do you think candidates like Donald Trump or Ben Carson are sort of leading most of these polls for the GOP right now? Professor Powelson, we'll start with you.
Well, I think it points to the bankruptcy of American politics. A couple of fools like these guys are actually in the spotlight themselves. I would say with Trump, he's a multimillionaire, and it's unfortunate that in our society, if you have a lot of money, you get to basically do whatever you want, despite your lack of credentials. So, for example, the #1 guy in education in the nation today is Bill Gates, and he's a college dropout. And the reason that he has the ear of the president is because he's a multi-billionaire. And it's unfortunate. Same thing with Ben Carson. What he doesn't know, you could fill up the Hollywood Bowl with, but it doesn't seem to matter because he's been able to collect, like, he said $20 million in campaigns. So unfortunately, our political system is fueled by money. It's not at all democratic. I would like to see a much more open political system in which teachers and construction workers and the average everyday person actually has access.
Professor Robb?
That would be nice. I don't think they have a chance. So there's an anti-intellectualism that's going on. There's a big threat of it in the Republican Party. So it's almost like the dumber they seem, the more popular they'll become. And it's very scary, and but the good thing is none of them are going to have a shot next year. When you poll pretty much all of them, they all lose against Bernie, against Hillary Clinton. I think most of them even lose against Martin O'Malley, who's really polling at 5%. So I don't think there's a shot for these people. Trump is dropping and Carson is rising. But the way they do it is by appealing to the basest of the lowest of the low. I mean, really, all they have to do is say, we're going to deport 11 million immigrants. And John Kasich is like a reasonable Republican from Ohio, and he's finally he'll say this in the debates tonight, he's finally starting to come out and say, I'm running with a bunch of crazy people. Are we going to knock on their doors and just drag them in? Ben Carson said yesterday that he wants to get rid of Medicare and Medicaid. You can't win an election by getting rid of the most important medical health care programs for senior citizens and the disabled. That's crazy. So this is just a small segment of the population. They're not going to win. And I think eventually maybe the cooler heads will prevail.
You know that Obama's deported more people than any other president.
I know.
So you talk about them being crazy. I mean, our president has deported more.
But he didn't run on that.
Well, he did it. I don't care what they say.
No,
I care what they do.
I know, but nobody knows what they're going to do because these are unknown people. They will let you
Professor Hughes, what are your thoughts?
Right now, I think it's just conservative angst. We have a very divided Republican Party in the nation, far more so than the Democrats right now, at least on the national level. We have a fairly weak mainstream Republican field, fairly weak candidates who are established Republican politicians. And this sort of everyman person I want to have a beer with, outsider phenomenon is not new. It's been going on for 250 years in American politics. So I'm not surprised it's happening. I agree that I think they're going to fizzle out pretty quickly. They do not stand a chance in a national election. And we've got to keep in mind the distribution of voters in a primary is completely different than the distribution of voters in a general election. It's talking about the very, very, very far right of the spectrum. And by the way, to echo some of Professor Robb's statements, is that they are saying things that, the average super far right, fairly maybe uninformed citizen thinks to themselves, yeah, we should deport all of the immigrants. We should build a wall in Mexico. These things that have no policy substance at all, but somebody out there, they think, wow, Trump's saying stuff that sounds just like what I think in my head, and they like it. I think when it comes to voting for people in 2 months and in 3 months when we actually have the primary, it's not going to happen.
But who built the wall? It wasn't Trump. There's a wall down there right now. You say it has no policy substance?
He's talking about
Covering the whole country.
building a Great Wall of China.
Oh,
type
so
wall.
you're saying a nice wall is okay?
I'm saying it's not a feasible policy alternative.
And on top of that, he wants to build a wall or wants to do that kind of stuff, but doesn't really have any backing to a lot of the things he said. Like you were saying, dragging out 11 million immigrants. It's like, well, how can you feasibly do that right now? It just doesn't seem like it.
He said, well, look, I built the Trump Towers. I can do that.
Have any of you seen that wall down there?
No.
I have. I've
Not in
crossed
person,
over
no.
It looks worse than the worst photos from the Cold War years. It's a shame and a tragedy. There's 2 walls. They've got barbed wire. It was built by Democrats and Republicans and people that you consider to be reasonable.
I'm not making a normative argument about our border with Mexico. I'm just saying that statements like that from Trump are not feasible policy alternatives.
What is he saying
that
the others aren't
When he does
saying?
make feasible policy alternatives, like when he gets specific on taxes, people get bored and his poll numbers dip.
Right.
Well, let's go on to a different topic. So we were talking about the presidential election, how it's a year away, but we started covering this thing last spring.
That's
Why do you
because
think
our
that we're
media's
covering
insane.
it so early? Well, Professor
The
Rob, what do
media
you
is
think?
insane. The media, if this was England...
Who isn't insane? You think everybody's insane?
Well, unfortunately, I do. If this were England, we'd be done in a few months, and you'd have free TV time.
And then you'd have Cameron, right?
Look, the thing is that the media is fueling this nonsense because the voters don't know much about. There's I think 15 Republican candidates, and the voters still, they're getting to know who some of these people are. I think Kasich really has one of the best shots, but people don't know who he is yet. But they will. They probably will after tonight's debate. It's too early. I agree. I think it would be great if we waited and let some time pass so that we don't have a year and a half of campaigning.
Professor Hughes?
I think it's a big outgrowth of the 24-hour news cycle, where we have to fill stories. If it bleeds, it leads, and the hype train starts pretty early. And I think it's an outgrowth of that. And I agree that in some ways it's unfortunate. In some ways I think it's just unavoidable, and it's just the context in which we live in now.
I think it's perfectly avoidable. What's really going on here is that both the right wing of the Republican Party is threatening to break and the left wing of the Democratic Party. So what they need to do is send people that talk what they want to hear. And at the end of the day, Bernie Sanders is going to do it and Ben Carson's going to do it, is they're going to get up there and say, you know what, we had our voice heard, we fought the good fight, now let's go vote for Hillary. That's what this is all about, right? It's all a shell game, really, because there are many millions and millions of people who will identify marginally with the Democratic Party who feel correctly so that they've been completely sold out. It's the same thing with the Republicans on the other side. So I don't think that this is just an inevitable thing or because the media is crazy. I think it's a very well orchestrated plan to send people out there to tell the little people that, we didn't win, so you got to vote for some other mainstream corporate candidate. And they do it every 4 years. You remember Dean, right? Howard Dean or...
Yeah.
But that being said, we're talking about Hillary and things like that, but in the last Democratic debate, they even had a question, why would you consider yourself an outsider? And, everybody was asking, would say, I'm an outsider because. Why is that now well, I'll ask later, but why is that now sort of the thing to be the outsider candidate?
There are no outsider candidates, really. I mean, on the Republican side, yes, there are. I mean, there was a pizza guy, Herman Cain, who almost...
But these are millionaires. They're not outsiders.
There's rich people.
Yeah.
Well, they're outsiders in terms of government.
In terms of being politicians.
Right. But
Give me their millions, I'll be the outsider.
They disappear. We always end up with the person who has the experience in government. And I think that you're going to see Trump and Carson will probably disappear too. Ultimately, the Democrats have no outsiders. Bernie, I don't know why they call Bernie Sanders. I think he's a lovely person and I agree with his politics, but he was in Congress for, 30 years or longer? And he's in the Senate. He's not there's nothing outsider. Outsider would be somebody with no experience, somebody, Trump is the perfect outsider who had a reality TV show. And I don't think ultimately people would elect him.
But Professor Hughes, why do you think that specifically they were asking a question about being an outsider candidate? I mean, they all responded, and we're talking about, well, I'm an outsider candidate because.
Yeah, well, I think, I guess for lack of a better term, it was sort of a debate tactic similar to like clickbait, right? Just trying to get, this is a buzzword that's being used, let's try to get people onto it. But the idea of an outside candidate, the idea of outsiders is not new. I mean, we had people generally in the general public are distrustful of government, they're distrustful of the Beltway, distrustful of Washington. You love your local U.S. representative, but you hate the job Congress does. That's a finding that's held for a very, very long time, just across the general population. And this is not new. So we have examples like Herman Cain, who's a sort of a true outsider, Trump, but George W. ran as an outsider, despite his dad being president and him being governor of Texas because he rode a horse and wore a cowboy hat. Jimmy Carter was an outsider. Reagan was an outsider.
Right,
These are not. This is not a new phenomenon at all in American politics.
Well, that's kind of going into the next question. Professor Powelson, this is for you. Has there ever been any previous elections in U.S. history where we've had this sort of outsider candidacy? And Professor Hughes touched upon it, but being the U.S. history professor, I just wanted to ask you that.
I think Abe Lincoln was an outsider, but actually no, because unfortunately in American politics, that it's determined by money, and so obviously both of the political campaigns. We did have, the Eugene Debs, who was a socialist, who ran a number of times, and he was really actually articulating things that were important to working class people, which is, by the way, the vast majority of people in the United States, and their issues are never ever addressed in that sense. So we have had outsider candidates, William Jennings Bryan of the Populists, this movement that swept the United States. But this is all phony populism, this stuff, and the outsiders were Donald Trump, who's totally hooked into, the most highest echelons of power, and Hillary goes to his wedding, and Trump goes to her daughter's wedding, and they act like they're outsiders, and this is laughable. Again, our media and our political system is run as it would any ad campaign. We don't really have a political system per se. We're just trying to sell a product. It's a brand, and they have the marketing people doing it. It doesn't really matter what any of these guys say because they don't have to fulfill any of their commitments. So that's where we should look at it. It's just simply an advertising campaign to convince people to buy the red soap instead of the blue soap.
And we don't really know what the American people really want because most of them don't vote. Even a presidential.
Well, why should they?
Well,
I mean, you don't have a choice. Well, I mean, the American voters are very intelligent.
I'm always telling my students that if young people voted, I mean, the political system is checked out. The young people don't vote, and so there's no need to pass any student loan reform or anything else that might benefit them because they know they don't vote. And who knows what would happen if millions of young people, put down their marijuana.
Well, Professor Rob, is it because, well, for example, we went and asked a bunch of students, who would you vote for? What do you think about this election coverage? Things like that. And most of them, if not all of them, could not answer most of the questions.
Right, of course.
They just didn't know or quite frankly didn't care.
Right.
So why do you think that is, that millennials just aren't intrigued at all about, politics or about who's running their country?
It's not that sexy because what's sexy is somebody going, I'm going to fix everything for you.
A lot of respect for the millennials, I must say.
I'm going to fix everything for you. I'm going to do things for you. But what it comes down to is really you actually have to spend time. I can't even get them to watch the debates for 2 hours unless I give them points. I have to give them points for everything because they don't have a lot of time. They're in school and they're busy. And that's why older people tend to vote a lot. They have a lot more free time. But they're busy. And also, they don't have time to research the different candidates. I think Bernie's appealing because he has been talking, and now Hillary too, is talking about free tuition. That's something that does get their attention.
Well, I think also it's important to note that in terms of participation rates, just who votes, who participates in politics, young people across generations have had very low rates of participation, right? So I always tell my students, look, your parents are probably telling you, look, you need to go vote. You're young kids. You don't know what you're doing. When they were young, they weren't voting either. They weren't participating either. And that's part of it is a function of the different resources you have when you get older. Part is a function of as you get older, you encounter more things that affect you politically. So it's not just millennials. It's the Generation Xers. When they were 18, they weren't voting, and when the Boomers were 18, they weren't voting. So it's a common trend across history.
Vietnam, though, when you start drafting people and they come home in body bags, all of a sudden, I told my students, I said they should bring back the draft because then that would be the end of the war.
The 60s are an exception.
But the Vietnam War did not come to an end because of a vote, okay?
Well,
it came to an end because people demonstrated.
They got the right to vote.
No, but they didn't elect people to. They didn't vote.
No, I mean they got the right to vote from 21 to 18.
But it didn't matter. Ultimately, you know, when Congress cut off the funding to Vietnam, it was in '74. The war was almost over. My argument, and I would have social science evidence to back me up, is that all of the great changes in American history have not come through the ballot box. We ended slavery in the battlefield, right? The civil rights movement was done in the street. Women got
and the 13th Amendment.
But that is only a result
of the 19th Amendment and the 14th Amendment and the 15th Amendment.
You're accusing me. The 13th Amendment was
ended slavery.
Ended slavery.
Right, but I'm just saying that the point is that the reason they pass these things is because people get active and demonstrate, not because they elect the right people.
It's a combination.
Oh, really? So the right to abortion was because they elected Nixon president and Berger is the Supreme Court justice? You serious about that?
A lot of states did. A lot of states had legal abortion.
No, we're right on track.
I'm going to try to reel us back into talking about sort of that outsider talk. Trying to get back on
I
that.
would like to make a point about, you know, why people don't vote. I think that there's a lot of contempt that is expressed towards young voters. I don't have that at all. They're very reasonable. They don't vote because there are no choices. They were told, if you vote for Obama, we're going to get out of these wars and the economic crisis is going to be fixed. We are not out of these wars, and the average family income has declined 20% since Barack Obama got elected. We were told to vote for Jerry Brown. He's going to make everything beautiful. Tuition has shot up here at the CSU system. Jerry Brown isn't doing anything about it. This is the reality why people don't vote, because they don't get any results from their voting. I don't blame them. If we're going to have Soviet-style elections, we can't expect people to participate.
Well, do you think, talking about outsiders, trying to get back on that, are those defined differently based on the party? Does an outsider in the GOP side differ from the definition of an outsider on the Democratic side? Professor Powelson.
Well, I'd already established I don't think any of these people are outsiders. They're part of the same hypocrisy. Every 4 years, we have this same...
Well, I'm not asking if they are. I'm asking, do you think the definition of an outsider would be different based on...
I don't know what that even means when you say an outsider. I mean, you're talking about people from the rarefied world. They're in the 0.001%. How are I mean, I suppose they're outsiders because they're such a small percentage.
I think he means outsiders from the political system.
How are they outsiders? They're in the Democratic and Republican Party. I mean, even Bernie Sanders.
But they weren't elected officials.
Would you say Bernie Sanders is an outsider?
Well, no, I'm not asking that.
I mean, he's labeled that, right?
He's trying to...
Then why is he running as a Democrat? That's not an outsider party.
He's trying to get a part of that. That's what he's trying to get into the system.
This is American politics.
He's asking, do Democrats consider outsiders different than Republicans? And an outsider, I think, for either party would be somebody we haven't seen over and over again and heard over and over again. And the great thing about being an outsider, or a supposed outsider, is that you have no record. Because if you've never held office, they can't say, well, look, Hillary voted to send us to war. Well, look, Bernie voted on that gun legislation. And Trump can go, I never did any of that. I was doing my TV show. You know, losers, you're all... He can just say anything he wants, any nonsense he wants, because he has no record because he's never held any office. But God forbid he actually got elected, and the crazy things that he's spouting are impossible to do and would destroy the country.
Professor Hughes?
I think it does the perception of being an outsider, because we could probably argue all day about whether or not people are outsiders. That's fine, but the perception...
Well, I really was. When I ran for Congress, I really was an outsider.
The perception of outsiders for the parties, I think, is a little bit different. I think there is a bit of an anti-intellectualism among the Republicans. You sort of want an everyman. You want the candidate you can have a beer with, the one that talks like you. You don't want, you know, sort of the uppity Yale graduate, although... I mean,
I do. Please give me the update.
This the surprise ending. I went to Fort Hays State University in Western Kansas. So,
that's good.
But you know, the surprise ending to that is you know, George Bush went to Yale. These people went to Harvard, schools, right?
Yeah.
So that doesn't work.
Or they dropped out.
They give that perception. Even among Democrats, I remember in 2008 that during the Coxon primaries, people perceived Obama as being too intellectual and speaking down to people. Although it's not nearly as, that contrast isn't so much in the Democrats as it is with the Republicans.
Do you guys think that presidents should have political experience before running?
Yes.
Yeah. Why is that, Professor Rob?
because I want to know something about what they've done and what they would do if they were in office. If they've only been a mayor of Wasilla, as a hypothetical, because that could never happen, but if they've only been a mayor of a small town in Alaska, for example, they haven't had a whole lot of experience. There's a lot. I would never want to be president. That's a really, really horrific job. There's so much to do, and you have to know so many things, and you have to be able to run the whole country. There's so much that happens in this country of 320 million people. I don't want somebody who just laid off a whole bunch of people and made a whole bunch of money. That, to me, is not leadership, and that's not experience.
Professor Powelson?
Well, I think you're asking the wrong question. I mean, political experience or no, it's what group you represent. And what I would like to see is a candidate that really represents the interests of working and middle-class people, and that is totally absent from our political debate right now. When when Obama was debating Mitt Romney, they didn't even mention the economy. Now, here at this campus, tuitions have skyrocketed. They have not raised the minimum wage. The students here are suffering mightily. Student loan debt is higher than it's higher than credit card debt right now as we speak. These are issues that are really important to the students here on this campus. They are absolutely not being addressed, and to me, that's the big crime.
Bernie's addressing them.
Only to tell you that you have to go vote for Hillary once he doesn't make the nomination.
You're assuming that.
Okay, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. We'll bet $100. You want to?
No, no,
Already bet him.
no. It could happen,
My point is that
but he is
the issues
talking
that are
about these issues.
Important. That's why he's getting the big crowds he is.
Yes.
And I don't disagree
He's
with
even
Bernie
talking
Sanders.
to evangelicals. Bernie goes and talks to evangelicals, and he says, "Look, I know abortion we disagree, gay rights we disagree. Let's talk about what we agree on, which is a populist
abortion and gay rights.
Well, I mean, he knows. He already knows. He's at Liberty University, but
No, I
he
got
says,
it.
what can we all agree on? He is talking about working class values and student loan debt.
But you have
and
to
everything
differentiate
else.
between, people that are really addressing the interests of the average working class person as opposed to the fake ones. And I would argue that Bernie is in no position. He's not going to get the nomination. If he got the nomination, he would never get elected. If he was elected, he would not be able to enact the things he's talking about. What needs to happen is, use the model that works. We built this massive anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, the feminist movement. We were unconcerned about what idiot was elected to office. And you know what? They did change. And not because we elected the good people. It's because we were mobilized on a mass level. This is what the powers that be are the most frightened of, is that people start demonstrating and they really get organized. And there was a demonstration here at CSUN a few years ago, and the police totally flipped out. There was thousands of people marching around, and they had copters overhead, and I remember thinking to myself, the SWAT team down the side streets, I go, these guys are intimidated by this stuff. This bothers them, and that's the kind of thing I think that students, our faculty union is about to vote for strike, right?
I want to try to put Professor Hughes in this conversation as well. Do you think that the president should have political experience before deciding to run?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it comes down to the complexity of the institution of the president. You have to have a career in politics to understand how the institution works, to be able to understand how to maintain the institution, how to forge relationships, to have relationships, to make public policy. And unfortunately, you have to be connected to the Beltway to do that. Unfortunately or fortunately, however you want to look at it. You have to be part of the Beltway to do that. It's a complex job in a complex system, and you have to know how it works.
Has there ever been a stronger party divide in history before, you think?
In terms of just ideological distance between the Republicans and Democrats?
Republicans and Democrats, just the separation.
Right now, Congress is the most polarized it's ever been, with the exception of the turn of the 20th century, and that divide was along rural and urban divide, but it was about as polarized, but along a different continuum. But the parties are very far apart from each other, and more importantly, there's nobody in the middle. So we don't have anybody to compromise with, and compromise is now a dirty word in Washington, so it's difficult to make public policy.
I beg to differ. They have this phony, but I'm sure you know that the sitting Vice President of the United States, Aaron Burr, murdered the former Treasury Secretary. It can get a lot worse than this.
Yes.
Preston Brooks beat the living crap
with cane.
So this has been throughout American history and congressional history. I don't see it any worse now than ever. Those guys always find that they can find common ground when they're funneling money to Wall Street or to the military-industrial complex. Suddenly they all get together. And you must know that the trillions of dollars that Democrat and Republican funneled to the private sector, this was a giant ripoff. It was engineered under G.W. Bush and under Barack Obama. They have this massive bomber program that they're about to introduce that's going to create jobs in California. I find this to be phony kind of a divide. They find the means and wherewithal to line the pockets of these major corporations, the military-industrial complex, and then they get in these stupid quibbles. I'm sure they're across the bar from Congress having drinks together at the end of the day laughing at all the little people. I don't buy
Like
that
Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
I mean, the point is that, this is a massive ripoff. The trillions of dollars that was transferred from the Federal Reserve System to Wall Street, and the trillions more that goes to our military-industrial complex. They seem to find a way to get bills passed that way, but when you're talking about, they're cutting food subsidies to the poorest of America. They're taking food out of kids' mouths. They do that, and then they talk about a great divide. I don't buy it. I think it's a canard, actually.
Clinton was able to accomplish a lot more in a divided government just by being more
He's a
more
good
Republican.
example. Glass-Steagall, he was the one that...
Right, more Republican than Republicans.
Well, just sort of wrap up because we have about a little under 2 minutes. Who do you think is going to win this election? Professor Hughes.
The primary?
The primary and then
general?
the general overall.
I think Hillary Clinton's going to be the Democratic nominee, especially now that Biden has said he's not going to run and Bernie's numbers are starting to fizzle. The Republican nomination, I think I would put my money on Rubio right now. I think he's young, he's energetic, he is a politician, he's a little bit more mainstream. I think our outsider candidates are gonna go away in a couple months, and it's either gonna be Rubio or maybe even Cruz or Kasich, but that's who we should look for, and we got 3 or 4 months figured out.
Professor Rob, really quickly.
I think maybe Kasich or Rubio would be my guess for the Republicans, but they won't have a chance against either Hillary or Bernie. But I'm afraid it's going to be Hillary. I mean, I want it to be Bernie. I think it's going to be Hillary.
And really quickly, Professor Powelson, who do you think is going to win the general election overall?
Wall Street.
Wall Street, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for being on the panel. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you for watching On Point. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at CSUN On Point. Sunday mornings, look for us on LA's Channel 36 at 11:30, and tune into KCSN on 88.5 FM at 5:30 in the morning to listen each week. For all of us here at On Point, I'm Ashton Smith, and we'll see you next week.